Let's begin to format our page by starting to add some styles. We'll start off by adding the universal selector, which will simply just zero out padding and margin on all of elements so that we can set those things uniquely as we go through our page. We're going to be building out our mobile styles first, so just keep that in mind as we go through what we're doing. I'm going to add styles to the HTML tag to set the font size to 100% and the line height to 1.5 as default values. And then we'll begin by adding some rules for our body tag. And on the body tag, we're going to set the color of fonts to white. We'll set the background color to black. Then we'll go ahead and specify a background image, and I'm using shorthand notation here. I'm going to have to go out of my CSS directory into my image directory to get to the image that I want. And for the small screen, we're going to be using a picture called Orchid Small Screen Top.jpg. And then I'll just specify that I don't want this image to repeat and position it top and right. We'll save that, and if we look in our browser, this is what we have. The next thing that I want to include on the body tag is the font family. I'm going to be using a embedded font, so in order to take advantage of this, I'm going to have to add a link to the font in my HTML page. So I've already researched the font and gotten the code from Google that I want to use, and I'm going to go ahead and add in the link to my font before I load my style sheet. And I'm going to be using the Josephine Sans font. So here's the link I have from Google. Alright, now that we've added the code for the Google font, I can go into my style file and I can define the font family. So I'm going to define the font family be the Josephine Sans, and I'll add fallback content to display sans serif in case that is not available. And then I'm going to define the font weight as being 600. If we save now and we look in our browser, you can see that all instances of the font has now changed to the Josephine Sans font. So that is what I wanted to display here. So that's looking great. Now what we'll do is we'll set some rules for the various tags that we're using. So I'm going to set rules for my H1, H3, and paragraph tags. For my H1, I'm going to define a font size of 28 pixels. I'll be using ems, so I've gone ahead and already converted that to ems unit. I'm going to specify a color of burgundy, and I'm also going to specify a margin on the bottom. The margin on the bottom that I'm using is going to be equal to 7 pixels, so here's the M equivalent, and then I'm setting the color. And because I'm using ems, I'm dividing 28 and 7 respectively into 16 pixels. I will go ahead and add similar styles to my H3 and my paragraph settings. And here you can see that I have the rules for my H3. Here I'm setting the font size to an equivalent of 21 pixels. I'm using the same margin on the bottom of 7 pixels, and I've set padding on the top of 7 pixels, and then I've defined a font weight to be slightly thicker. I'm using a font weight of 700 and a border on the top. And then for my paragraphs, I'm defining the font size to be 14, and I've increased the line height slightly. If we save our page now and we check it out in the browser, we have something that looks like this. Let's continue styling the other elements. I'm just going to add some rules for my default tags. Here I have styles for my links, the hover, and I'm also setting my images to have a max width of 100% and a height of auto. At this point, our site should be fully responsive, so if I refresh my page and we resize the screen, you can see that I don't get the horizontal scroll bars anymore. So this is starting to come together quite nicely. We'll continue to add some other styles to our page. I'm going to add a rule on the section tag that just sets the margin on the right and left to be 5 pixels. In addition to that, on the section tag, I'm going to add some padding all around of 10 pixels. I'm adding a white border around the edges, and I'm setting the text color to black. Then we're going to use some CSS3 to add a gradient to the background color. The core component that I'm using is going to be linear gradient, and I'm going to have my color go from a 80% white to a 60% white. So it's just going to be a very subtle variation in a white to less opaque white gradient. And I've added quite a bit of fallback content for the older browsers here. And then I'm using this filter, which is for Microsoft versions IE 6 through 9. So if we save now and we check out this in the browser, you can see that I have a really subtle gradient that goes from a partially transparent white to a less transparent white. But now my text is easier to see and shows up much better. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to style the container. You may have recalled that the container is the div that actually wraps around all of the content on the page. On the container, we'll set the maximum width to 900 pixels. I'm going to set my margin setting to 25 pixels for the top, and I'll use auto for the right and left, and we'll just use 0 for the bottom. You can see that now my page has resized, and as I expand and contract my browser, the content is going to flex and move on the page. Now I'm just going to add a couple of styles to a couple of the elements that are appearing on our page. We're going to add a rule for .content, which is the class of the div that is wrapping around the promo text right here. And all we're going to do here is just add a little bit of spacing. So here I will add a margin top of 15 pixels, and I'm going to add some padding on the right of 20 pixels as well. And then what I want to do is I want to have a thin white line appearing around the images that are within this section. So I'm going to make a specific rule for the promo images and just give them a white border that goes around the edges. Next, let's add a rule for our footer. For my footer, I'm just going to set some margin on the top and the bottom of 10 pixels, right and left of 0. I'll center my text, and I'll add a font size of 0.75 ems. If we refresh our page in the browser now, you can see that this is what my page currently looks like. Remember, these are our small screen rules. So if I make my page small, this is what we currently have. So this is looking great so far. I just want to make my navigation look more like navigation, and I also want to add a link that says menu when the page is at its small size. So we're going to need to add a little bit of HTML, but we'll deal with the navigation in the next exercise.